From humble beginnings to his rapid rise as the infamous mob boss of Chicago, today we dive into the bloody but compelling story of Scarface himself, Al Capone. This is obviously a very different video from me, but organized crime has always just fascinated me to no end. How someone, a totally normal person, can go from a barber's son to, spoiler alert, making $100 million a year. How do you get to that point? Like, you have to be gifted on some level. So in case you missed it, we will be talking about different organized crime bosses this entire month. I explained everything in my last update video, and I thought who better to start with than the original gangster? Like, duh. All the makeup I'm going to be using will be down there. Now let's dive into the rise and fall of Al Capone. Okay, I'm doing all my makeup today because this is gonna be a long one. January 17th, 1899, Alphonse Gabriel Capone is born in Brooklyn, New York to two very ordinary working class parents. His father was a barber and his mother was a seamstress. They had been pasta makers in Italy before immigrating to the US in 1893, and they had 9 children total, so Al had 8 siblings. Now, in grade school, Al was pretty decently smart. He made good grades, but there was a big glaring problem. So Al went to a very strict Catholic school, and as you can imagine, Al Capone was not very keen on following the rules. Surprise, surprise. Now, he was still a good student for the most part, but in 6th grade, he left school after an altercation with a teacher. So apparently the teacher hit him, and then he hit back, and then the principal beat him even more. So can we even blame him for leaving? But by this point, Al already had quite the reputation. He was known for being a good fighter by the time he was 9 years old. Like, can you imagine having a reputation for being a good fighter when you are 9? Like, not even double digits yet. So after he leaves school, his parents are obviously kind of worried about this path that he's on, and as sort of a last-ditch attempt to steer him towards an honest living, his father bought him a shoe shine kit. But there's another problem, because there's another kid close by who also has a little shoe shine business, so he has some competition. Is shoe shining still a thing? No, right? I don't know. So what does a young 16-year-old Al Capone do? Apparently hire 2 of his cousins to go rough him up a little bit, rough up the competition, and while they're doing that, Al tells him to give him all of his money if he doesn't want any trouble. And so the kid, kind of freaking out, is asking him, like, is this gonna happen every week? Like, are you guys gonna beat me up and take my money every week? And Al says, no, of course not. I wouldn't do that. It's gonna be every day. Because it's Al Capone, of course it is. So now he's essentially started his first little extortion racket. Now, somewhere along the line, I couldn't find an exact date. That's always a huge problem with these older stories. There aren't a whole lot of primary sources. Al meets a man named Johnny Torrio, and to Al, it's like the clouds opened and a sunbeam hit him. Because Johnny was a genius in the criminal underworld. Everybody knew who he was, and he would end up being sort of a mentor for Al. But later on, Johnny ended up leaving Brooklyn and moving to Chicago. Remember that? It's gonna come back up. But after the shoe shine incident, Al actually does try and get like a normal job. He worked a few jobs around Brooklyn in places like bowling alleys, factories, candy stores. I'm sorry, but imagine Al Capone selling candy to you. Like, that's never gonna not be hilarious. But also around this time, he's still 16 and he officially joins the gang life, joining 5 Points Gang and serving an aspiring mobster named Frankie Yale. Now, Frankie was violent, volatile, considered extremely dangerous, and yet generous to lower class people. But Al was one of the very few who were not afraid. He wanted to work with him. He was inspired. He was maybe simping a little bit. And Frankie would also mentor Al, give him some advice along the way, and one of the things he shared with him was always make sure your reputation precedes you. And Al would go on to do that better than anyone. And in retrospect, I think this is what would elevate Al so highly so quickly, having not one but 2 different mentors that were sort of opposites of each other, giving him multiple viewpoints on things. It just created the perfect storm to skyrocket his status. So Al worked a few different jobs with Frankie. He would work as a busboy or a door guy for his bar. He would work as a bodyguard for him, etc. And in 1918, when Al is 19 years old, something would happen that would change everyone's perception of Al forever. So he's paying his dues, working at the bar, and he sees this beautiful woman and tries to win her over. And by win her over, I mean he complimented her butt, which is like objectively creepy. But this girl, she had her brother with her, Frank Galluccio, and he works in the mob, so he's about it. So they get in a fight, as you do, and Frank pulls a knife and slashes Al's face 3 times. And from here on, Al would forever be known as Scarface. Can relate. Sort of. Not really, but sort of. Now, Frank would say that he was actually aiming for his throat, but he was drunk, so he got his face instead. Swing and a miss. So in 1920, Al is about 21 years old, and he moves to Chicago to be with Johnny Torrio, and that is where pretty much the rest of the story takes place. But this same year, another big major thing happened that would change the entire trajectory of Al's life. Multiple lives, really. Prohibition. And it's kind of funny because Al was like the alcohol guy, like that is how he made most of his money, and Prohibition went into effect on his 21st birthday. That is so ironic. So now Prohibition is in full swing. Alcohol is illegal, and Al knew that the people thought this was BS. So he talks to Johnny Torrio and he tells him like, hey, we should really start a bootlegging operation. And this would change everything. It would change history as we know it. But fairly quickly, Al and Johnny run into a little issue. Now at this time, Johnny is number 2 in the Chicago underworld, with his boss, Big Jim Colosimo, being boss, obviously. But Big Jim didn't go for the bootlegging idea. He didn't want the risk. And instead of listening to his boss, Johnny put in a call to none other than Frankie Yale, Al's other mentor, the dangerous one. I mean, they're all dangerous, but this guy was extra dangerous. And it is about to hit the fan. So Johnny offered Frankie $10,000, or about $150,000 in today's money. So Frankie traveled to Chicago, went to Big Jim's restaurant, and carried out the hit. The murder had the entire Chicago underworld on high alert, but it allowed Al and Johnny to continue their bootlegging business. But more than that, there's obviously now a change in status. Johnny Torrio is now boss of the Chicago outfit, and Al Capone is his right-hand man. His number 2, but that sounds kind of gross. And Al's bootlegging idea grows their empire rapidly. Within just a couple of years, they take over 9 shuttered breweries and they start raking in cash, making minimum $3 million a year, aka $51 million in today's money. But how are they getting away with all of this? Well, Al had a mutually profitable relationship with the Chicago Police Department and also the Chicago Mayor, William Hill Thompson. aka police were on their payroll, and Al allegedly donated $250,000 in back then money to the mayor's campaign before the election and carried out some intimidation efforts to get him elected. Basically, the other candidate had threatened to bring the hammer down on bootlegging, so Al wanted to make sure William won, to the point of, just wait for it, blowing up voting booths in the areas where the opponent's supporters would be voting. I don't even really know what to say. Treacherous behavior. But Al's guy won, and all of this meant that he was safe from law enforcement, maybe even above law enforcement. Like, even if you look at his criminal records, all of them are either discharged or dismissed. I cannot do eyebrows on camera for the life of me. Also, I plucked them into oblivion because I knew I wanted to do like 20s makeup for today, so please appreciate this video. Please like or comment or anything. My eyebrows are begging. So things are looking up for Al and Johnny, but in the organized crime world, things can never go well for too long. Don't really think they had highlighter in the 20s, but pretty soon every other gang wanted to cash in on this bootlegging craze, which would bring about the beer wars. All through the 20s, gangs were fighting each other over breweries, hijacking each other's alcohol shipments, and eventually resorting to violence and killing. It was an absolute bloodbath, and eventually over 500 Chicago gangsters are killed by each other, with Al Capone definitely doing his share. And sadly, Chicago police didn't really do anything about it because, I mean, if you think about it, these troublesome gangsters are all killing each other. They're essentially taking care of the problem for them. So in 1924, Chicago's North Side Gang, aka rivals to Al and Johnny's gang, now they were briefly in business together until it was found out that they cheated Johnny out of a lot of money and hijacked a truckload of his whiskey. So now they are rivals. They don't like each other, but these Northsiders keep kind of testing the waters, keep trying to move in on Johnny's territory, and eventually Johnny had had enough. So again, who does the gang call? Frankie Yale. And on November 10th, he goes to carry out the hit on the North Side boss, Dean O'Banion. Can't do wings on camera either, I'm sure you understand. Now, Dean is a florist by day. Who would have thunk it? I think that's actually like low-key kind of cute for a mob boss. So he was working at his flower shop when a few guys came in under the guise of buying a wreath. But instead they gave him what they call the Chicago handshake. Basically, they go in for a handshake, pull him forward, stick a weapon into his torso, and fire. But like any mob boss should, Dean O'Banion has some friends in low places, and they are out for revenge. Now in January 1925, so just a couple months later, there is an ambush on Al's gang by the Northsiders that leaves everyone unharmed, but obviously really shaken up. And I believe this is the point where Al starts getting uneasy. He's taking precautions that he never really had before. He gets bodyguards, he puts bulletproof windows in his car, he made his dining chair bulletproof. He even had his home remodeled to accommodate a machine gun turret. This is my conflict resolution turret. He had another home in Florida and one here in Tennessee where I live, and the one here has like escape hatches, secret passageways, everything. These days it's a music studio, which is like so disappointing. That would be my dream home, honestly. I have always wanted like a murder mystery mansion with secret passages and escape tunnels and like perpetual lightning above it. Anyway, after only 12 days after the ambush, Johnny and his wife return home from shopping where Dean's North Side guys are waiting. Now, Johnny is shot 5 times, but some crazy how survives, and Al takes this as an opportunity to show his loyalty and really be there for him. So Johnny is in the hospital and Al is thinking he's vulnerable now, like somebody is gonna come in and finish the job. So he sits with Johnny, basically bodyguarding his bed day and night. And some of us can't even get a text back. So after Johnny recovers, he tells Al that this is it for him. He's done with a criminal life and he goes back to New York to retire in peace. And now in 1925, at only 26 years old, Al Capone is the newly minted boss of the Chicago outfit. And only 6 years after coming to Chicago. He's paid his dues, climbed the ranks, and now with political and law enforcement protection, he is the new kingpin, raking in around $100 million a year, which is roughly $1.7 billion in today's money. Every year. Johnny had paved the way for him, and in a lot of ways, I think Johnny Torrio walked so Al Capone could run. But obviously, a title like mob boss comes with a price, aka a giant target on your back. So with the beer wars still raging on, Al's first year as boss was constant survival mode and assassination attempts. Everyone was out for blood now. Everyone wanted to bring him down, including rival bootleggers Miles and Bill O'Donnell. Now, they had been sabotaging Al's spirits for months, and I guess one night they got cocky and decided to go drinking with some of their friends on Al's territory. And when Al hears this, he is furious. He orders a hit, his men rushed over there, and the brothers are hit, but they survive. But one person did not, and that person was Assistant State's Attorney William McSwiggan. And Al is like, oh no, deer in headlights, he has screwed all the way up. Because this wasn't just another gangster being killed, this was someone important, so to speak. His connections and money can't save him now, and the entire Chicago Police Department is sent to bring Al to justice. So they are looking everywhere, turning every stone, but Al has gone into hiding, and for 3 months he follows the media stories surrounding his own manhunt. But he realizes something. See, Al Capone loves attention. He used to love going to baseball games because people would cheer when they saw him. And now, for good or bad, all eyes were on him. I mean, not literally, but you know. He realizes he's watching himself become a legend in real time, and once he registered that, he stepped out of the shadows. So in 1926, he called a press conference because apparently he can do that, where he stood on the Chicago courthouse steps and said that William, the guy that had been shot, was one of his guys on his payroll. And when you think about the implications, he is saying that the prosecutor is working for him. He is signaling to everybody that he is above the law. He says that he did not kill him, and he says, if the police want to talk to me, here I am. If the media want to talk to me, here I am. He has just publicly announced himself the mob boss of Chicago right there on the courthouse steps in front of everyone. And this was what really launched Al Capone into legend status, into the history books. Like, this was the moment. Now, obviously, Al Capone has done some horrible things, killing, putting hits out on people, etc. But by many accounts, he was actually quite the humanitarian when he didn't have a gun in his hand. He apparently had a soft spot for honest, working class people, and even had local loan sharks under his control take it easy on people who were struggling. So during the Great Depression, he gave away money and food, bought clothes for needy people, always tipped very generously, gave complete strangers these big extravagant gifts, and gave millions to charity. He was even the first to open free soup and bread kitchens in Chicago. And small-time petty criminals feared Al Capone more than they feared the police. If you were caught stealing from small businesses or robbing people on the street, you were not going to have a good time with the mob. But normal working class people didn't fear Al Capone because they didn't interfere with his business. In a lot of ways, he was, dare I say, a hero to them. He's also somewhat responsible for expiration dates on food, which is so random. But apparently someone he knew got sick from spoiled milk, so he launched an entire investigation into the dairy industry, which is intense. But he realized that there was very little regulation on the storage and delivery of milk, so he lobbied with authorities to get expiration dates put on things. Plenty of people say he was actually kind and generous, and how he acted was just part of his business. The perception of his character was and still is completely dependent on who you ask and their point of view. But either way, Al's downfall was well on its way. On February 14th, 1929, all of this ongoing gang activity in Chicago culminated in the St. Valentine's Day massacre that killed 6 members and 1 associate of the rival North Side gang. The back-and-forth competition for control of organized crime in Chicago had finally reached its breaking point. Around 10:30 a.m. that morning, the 7 Northsiders were lured to a garage in Lincoln Park with the promise of a shipment of whiskey by Detroit's Purple Gang, who were associated with Al Capone. But once they got inside, 2 men in police uniforms ordered them to line up against a brick wall. 2 men in normal clothing joined the police, and the 4 of them opened fire on the 7 Northsiders. Afterwards, witnesses saw the 2 men in normal clothing walking out with their hands in the air, while the 2 in police uniforms had them at gunpoint, which was obviously a clever ruse to tell everyone that, hey, everything's under control, and that the 4 of them hadn't just killed 7 men. When Chicago police arrived, miraculously, 1 man was still alive after 14 bullet wounds. But when they tried to question him to ask who did this, all he said was, "I won't talk. For God's sake, get me to a hospital." And he died 3 hours later in the hospital, having never given up the names of who shot him. So the perpetrators were never identified. identified. Al Capone is obviously a major suspect for reasons that we'll get into in a second, but other people believe that it was revenge for the killing of a policeman's son. I'm done with my makeup, by the way. I didn't think I would be done this early, but here we are. But it's pretty widely believed that this was an attempt to kill a man named George Bugs Moran, the new leader of the Northsiders after Dean O'Banion was killed. Now, he was supposed to be at the garage too, but as fate would have it, he got there just a little bit late, and one of the shooters mistook one of the other men for him. But why would anyone want Bugs Moran dead? Turns out, a lot of reasons. He had been trying to take over the bootlegging trade, taking over several saloons run by Al, claiming they were in his territory, and hijacking a bunch of Al's liquor shipments. Not to mention, the North Side had already killed 3 of Al's friends. And in September of 1926, when Al was eating lunch at a hotel, a bunch of cars pulled up with machine guns and opened fire. Al's bodyguard threw him to the ground right as Bugs Moran stepped out of the last car and sprayed the entire restaurant with bullets. So tensions are obviously escalating between the North Side and Al Capone's South Side, and to be fair, the North Side are usually the aggressors. Eventually, it was kill or be killed. However, Al was in his Florida home at the time of the massacre, which meant that it was probably ordered by him and not carried out personally. Either way, this was the very last straw for officials, and they brought in the feds, who gave Al his other infamous nickname, Public Enemy Number 1. A case against Al was built, but okay, get ready for this. Okay, it's kind of a spoiler, but Al Capone was never charged with a single murder. Ever. Like, that blew my mind. And most of them were hits ordered by him, even though he absolutely did actually kill people himself too. But witnesses never talked because they were either scared of him or they admired him and stayed out of his way, so it's impossible to figure his actual body count. But nonetheless, in October 1931, he was convicted of the one and only thing that the government will absolutely not let you get away with: tax evasion. He used to brag that they can't collect legal taxes on illegal money, but apparently they can. He was sentenced to a then unheard of 11 years in prison, $50,000 in fines. He had to pay back $250,000 in taxes, and he did pay everything without any real protest. He was shipped off to Atlanta Penitentiary in May 1932 and was relocated to the brand new Alcatraz in 1934. And we've talked about Alcatraz before. Go watch it, please. Apparently when he got there, the warden asked him for his name and he just looked at him and said, "You know who I am." But he was a model prisoner and played banjo in the prison band because literal Alcatraz had a band, I guess. But in 1939, his health was declining rapidly from late-stage syphilis, which apparently can affect your brain really badly. Didn't know that. So he was released to Baltimore Hospital and eventually retired to his Florida home, where he passed away from cardiac arrest in 1947 at 48 years old. Apparently, the sickness had affected his brain so much that he had the mental capacity of a 12-year-old at the time of his death, which is really sad. Like him or hate him, it's sad to go from this incredibly street-smart tough guy to that. Also, he had a treasure box with millions of dollars in it that he hid somewhere, but apparently his brain got so bad that he just plain forgot where he put it. So there's a box out there with millions of dollars in it that has never been found, which is so crazy to think about. Like, there's literally just millions of dollars just laying out there somewhere. And that is all I have for today. I hope you liked my tale. I think what fascinates me about Al Capone is that his story exists in this very, dare I say, relatable gray area where he probably wasn't a very good guy, but he did a lot of really good things. Was he the monster that the media made him out to be, or was he just a product of his time and circumstances? Did the good outweigh the bad, or vice versa? Personally, I think multiple things can be true at once, but I want to know what you think. Anyway, thank you for coming over, and as always, if you have any story ideas, please feel free to comment them so I can see what you want to see, and with that, I will see you next week. Toodaloo!